Hire her. 2 words spoken by a man the entire county had already buried alive. The Duke of Wycliffe had not addressed a living soul in that voice for 2 years. Not the weeping mother who begged at his door, not the nurses who fled his house in tears. He sat with his back to the world behind drawn curtains waiting to die. And then a penniless attendant lost in his corridors made the one mistake no one else had dared. She mistook him for a servant. She lectured him on his manners. She turned on her heel and left. Why would a dying duke hire the only woman who refused to pity him? What did he hear in her voice that 2 years of gentleness never gave him? And why, God help them both, was his cousin already racing north to stop it? Have you ever been counted out by the whole world, buried while your heart still beat, told, in 100 gentle and well-meaning ways, that the finest part of your life had already come and gone, and then, worst of all, started to believe it yourself? That was the Duke of Wycliffe, or what the Count now called by his name, in the careful voices people save for the dying. There had been another man before this one. Theodore Ashcombe had once arrived in a room before his body did. 60 years old, and still carrying his height like a verdict, no one bothered to appeal. He had ridden the boundaries of his own land in every season, knew which tenant's roof leaked and which one only claimed it did. He had read every figure in every account book by his own candle, because a man who lets another count his money has already begun handing it away. He had married late and well, and buried his wife 3 winters into it, and turned that grief into labor the way lesser men turn it into drink. The county had respected him, feared him a little. Now it lowered its voice at the mention of him, the way one does outside a sick room, because a horse had thrown him on an iron morning 2 years gone, on ground frozen hard as a church floor, and the fall had taken something the surgeons could neither name nor give back. Not a clean break, something deeper. The legs simply stopped answering. 2 years in a wheeled chair since. 2 years behind curtains in a house built to drink the morning sun, and now forbidden to taste a drop of it. And in those 2 years he had broken every soul his mother sent to mend him. A nurse from the city had denied days before she wept in the pantry and asked to be released. A valet of 30 years' service had given notice in tears, unable to bear being addressed each morning as though he were furniture. A young physician, full of bright theories, had been dismantled with 3 quiet sentences and never returned. The Duke had a talent for finding the exact place where a person's patience wore thin and setting his whole weight there until it gave. It had become, God forgive him, the nearest thing he had to a craft. The servants did not call it sorrow. Sorrow they might have nursed. They called it, when certain no master could hear, a slow burning of the fields. Salt sown where nothing was meant to grow again. And here is the thing the house did not know, the thing the weeping mother did not know. The fields were not being burned by accident. 2 winters passed the same season he fell. The Duke had named his heir and set the succession in proper order, as any responsible man does when his body betrays him. That was sense, not surrender. But only months ago, when the last hopeful physician had packed his bag and gone, Theodore Ashcombe had made a second, quieter arrangement. Not on paper. In himself, he had decided how he meant to go, and at what pace, and that no one would notice the going until it was already finished. The drawn curtains, the pushed-away trays, the refused medicine. None of it was tantrum, whatever it looked like from the corridor. It was a proud man tidying his own departure, the only estate left that he could still command. A man does not reach such a place in a single leap. He has walked there, one kindness at a time, by people who love him and lower their voices and finish his sentences, until the kindness has built him a grave with a roof and a fire and clean linen, called it and edit. Care. And then, on the most important morning of her life, a woman who had never once been told to lower her voice, for anyone, walked straight into the middle of it. Her name was Beatrice Fairweather, and at that moment she was thoroughly, miserably lost. She had no business in the West Wing. The West Wing was a riddle of identical oak doors and corridors that grew colder The deeper a stranger pressed into them. She had taken one wrong turn at a staircase, a second meant to repair the first, and a third that wedded the two and stranded her entirely. She had passed the same sour ancestor in his cracked gilt frame twice now, and the second time he seemed to disapprove of her with real feeling. Her appointment was for 11. It was very nearly 11, and Beatrice Fairweather did not arrive late. Not today. Not for the one position in 3 counties that might keep her father warm and fed through the coming winter and her own conscience quiet. She knew sick rooms the way a sailor knows weather by the back of the neck. For 3 years she had tended a father after a fall robbed him of his left leg, and, for one long black season, his wish to keep breathing. She had sat through the rages, the smashed cup against the wall, the long afternoons of a silence so total it had its own weight. She had learned, at that bedside, the difference between grief that wants room to lie down in and anger that wants only a wall to throw itself against. She had learned it alone, by getting it wrong first. Which was why an unfamiliar house could not frighten her, and a cold corridor could not either, and the single thing that did frighten her was the clock. Bread does not buy itself. A father's medicine does not appear on the shelf by prayer. She had counted the coins in the jar by the door before she left that morning, the way she counted them every morning. And the counting was the whole reason her chin stayed level while the rest of her wanted to run. So when she came to the next heavy door, she did not pause to gather courage she did not need. She pressed it open and stepped through, certain of only one thing: that someone on the far side could tell her where she was meant to be. She was right that someone was there. She was wrong about nearly everything else. The room was a study, and it had the air of a place where something had quietly stopped. Vast, airless. It smelled of old paper and a hearth so long dead it had given up the pretense of being a hearth at all. Thin light leaned in through curtains, half drawn, the reluctant light of a room that has not made it welcome. And in the farthest corner, in a tall wing-back chair turned with great deliberation toward the wall, sat a man with his back to the door, the whole of his back. As a statement, she took him for the estate manager, or some idle relation gone soft after a weekend's shooting and lingering past his use. "Forgive me, sir. I am hopelessly lost. Could you direct me to the Duchess's drawing room?" Nothing, not a turn of the head, not the smallest shift of a shoulder. No sign at all that a living creature had spoken in the room, sir. One direction. That is the whole of what I want: silence, the deep kind, the deliberate kind. The air hung thick and unstirred, as though no breath had troubled it in days. Most people would have murmured an apology to the back of that chair and fled. Most people learn young which doors are best left shut. Beatrice was not most people, and she knew, with a certainty that came up from somewhere below thought, that this was no man lost in honest pain. Honest pain she would have knelt beside in an instant. This was a man wielding his own stillness like a blade, hoping to cut at the world until it finally left him be. She nursed that precise performance for 3 years across a different bed, and she had buried what little patience she once had for it. "I see." Her voice came out trimmed and cool. Then, "Forgive the intrusion. I had assumed I was addressing a gentleman." Clearly the assumption was generous. The shoulders in the chair went rigid, only just. She marked it the way she marked everything. "It is a curious arithmetic," she went on, mild as a Sunday. "Ignoring a guest costs a man far more effort than simply pointing her toward a door. You have already spent enough on this silence to have shown me out of the corridor twice over. I confess I wonder that a man with such evident leisure has never paused to consider the waste of it." A beat. She gave it to him freely. He returned nothing at all. "Very well. I shall find the room myself. I only pray the rest of this household keeps better manners than its furniture does." She turned on her heel. She left, and she drew the heavy door shut behind her with exactly enough force to enter her opinion into the permanent record of the house. Not a slam. She was a professional to the bone. But its near cousin, what she did not see, because his face never once came round, was that the man in the chair had not been ignoring her for 1 second of it. He had heard every word the way a man dying of thirst hears rain begin on a roof he is too proud to step out under. No one in 2 years had spoken to him without the soft, dreadful gentleness reserved for the doomed. No one had been simply briskly annoyed with him, as one is annoyed with a healthy man behaving badly. She had not pitied him. She had been irritated by him. And to a man who had begun to suspect he had stopped counting as a person at all, irritation landed like an unexpected hand on the shoulder. He sat very still after the door closed. And for the first time in a long while, the stillness was not a weapon. It was only a man, listening to footsteps fade, and wondering who on earth she was. The drawing room, when she finally stumbled upon it, was the study turned inside out, warm, bright, a fire that meant every word of it. And by the hearth, in a high chair with a straight back, sat the Dowager Duchess, Lady Augusta, a woman in her 80s whose spine had plainly declined the surrender the rest of her had been forced to sign, thin as old silver in places, worth more than the room around her. The interview began oddly and only deepened. The notice had named no patient, no illness, only a need for experience and for someone, it said with care, unafraid of a trying temper. Beatrice had taken the vagueness for discretion. She was beginning to understand it had been dread, written down and posted to strangers. Lady Augusta asked whether she frightened easily, whether she had the constitution for thankless labor, whether she grasped that she would be, in the old woman's exact and weary phrase, the least beloved person under this roof. And each time Beatrice answered plainly. The Duchess's gaze slid toward the door, as though awaiting a ruling from a court that had not yet been called to sit. Then the doors opened, both of them, without the courtesy of a knock. A man came through them, not walking, wheeled, propelled by his own 2 fists, the knuckles drained white on the rims, a heavy wool rug laid across legs that did not so much as twitch, and the rest of it struck her all at once, cold as a bucket flung in the face. The shoulders that crowded the doorway even seated. The face, carved past severity into something nearer ruin. And beneath the ruin, undeniable, the foundations of a man who had been, and somewhere still was, remarkably handsome. Understanding came down on her in a single cold stroke, the way a name you have been groping for arrives, all at once, the frightened servants, the notice, with no patient in it. The village whisper no one would finish. The chair, this was no recluse she had heard of secondhand. This was the very man she had lectured like a kitchen boy not a quarter-hour before, on the subject of his manners. And in the room grew a spine of its own. Lady Augusta's cup halted halfway to her mouth, and simply stayed there, suspended, while her face arranged itself into the expression of a woman watching a coach roll, with awful slowness, toward the lip of a high bridge. But the Duke did not look at his mother. His eyes, hollowed and worn down to the wick, came straight to Beatrice and stopped there. Past the diamonds of the room, past his mother, past everything. Direct as a palm laid flat against the breastbone, she waited for the blow. The dismissal, the cold sentence, the public ruin she had earned so completely. She kept her chin level and her eyes locked to his, and she did not look away. And she did not apologize, because she would not apologize for asking a man to grant a stranger the one small courtesy, a single word. He stared, long, weighing her. A muscle ticked once at the hinge of his jaw, and then the thing happened that no one in that house had seen in 2 years. The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile exactly. The pale ghost of where a smile had once stood, passing briefly back through a room it used to keep. He turned his face to his mother. He gave her 2 words, low and final, that left no door for argument. Hire her. He did not wait on an answer. He dragged the wheels around and rolled himself back through the open doors, and he left them gaping wide, and a ringing, astonished silence settled where the man had been. Lady Augusta set her cup down with the slow care of a woman, handling something that had become, without warning, very heavy. She looked at the empty doorway a long moment. Then she looked at the young woman in the plain gray dress who had walked into her house an hour before, and, by some means the Duchess could not begin to name, knocked it clean off its axis. "Well," she said at last, with the exhausted composure of a woman who had stopped being surprised by her son some years ago. "It would appear, Miss Fairweather, that the position is yours." She began on a Monday at 7 in the morning, because 7 was when she had always begun, and she saw no reason a duke should rearrange her habits. The housekeeper walked her up the first morning, with the air of a woman leading a recruit to the front. She confided things in a low voice along the way, glancing back as if the walls were a report to someone. "The curtains," she whispered, "had not been drawn fully back in 2 years. 2 years, miss. The doctor's tonic went untouched on the tray most nights. The last nurse had lasted a week and a half and left without her final wages rather than spend a 10th night under that roof." She said it the way one confesses a sin, and then she stopped at the door and would not cross the threshold. And Beatrice understood that from here she was alone. She knocked twice and went in without waiting. Because waiting only teaches a sick room that it may keep you standing in the hall. He was awake. Sitting up in the gray dimness, dark hair disordered, last night's dinner gone cold and untasted on the side table, watching her enter with the flat weariness of a man taking inventory of his newest nuisance. "You will leave those curtains exactly where they are." His voice was low and rough from disuse, but the command in it had not cracked. "I forbid it. Good morning, Your Grace." And she crossed to the window and drew the curtains wide. The light came in like something poured from a great height. He flung up a hand and turned his face hard away, made a sound that was not quite a word, and not quite human. A man recoiling from his own east window as from a struck match. That, he managed, when he had gathered enough cold to speak, was open defiance of a plain instruction. "I find the light a great help in the mornings, Your Grace." She was already at the tray, lifting the silver lid and reading the congealed plate beneath it like a letter bearing bad news. "You did not eat your supper. I was not hungry. A body cannot mend on temper, Your Grace. Stubbornness burns no fuel. It only borrows it." And from a man who can spare none, he stared at her. She let him, and what he found in her face was not defiance, and it was not the softy he had learned to read in everyone, but the level, immovable patience she had spent 3 years perfecting at another bedside, a look that promised, without one grain of unkindness, that she had nowhere in the world to be, and no intention whatever of leaving the room. He looked away first. He did not apologize, and he conceded nothing in words. But when she returned 20 minutes later with a fresh tray, warm this time, he ate, slowly, with resentment, watching her the entire while, as though she had cheated at cards. It was not a victory. She knew better than to name it one. It was only the first move on a board that promised to be very long. And here is the part of it the household never guessed. Beatrice Fairweather did not take that morning's small win to her room and gloat over it. She took it upstairs, sat on the edge of her narrow bed, and wept for exactly 2 minutes into a handkerchief, because the cold push tray had reminded her, with no warning, of another man in another room 3 years gone who had also refused his supper, and whom she had nearly lost to that refusal before she learned how to fight it. Then she dried her face and washed it and went back down. No one saw, no one was meant to. She had learned long ago that the people who do the hardest tending are most often tending 2 beds at once, one in front of them, one in memory. The first fortnight was a war fought almost entirely without words. He came at her with every weapon in a considerable armory. He refused meals to see whether she would plead. He refused the tonic to see whether she would scold. He answered her in clipped scraps or in nothing at all, which was worse, and which he knew was worse. He sent her from the room on no grounds and rang for her an hour later for some trifle he plainly did not need, and rang again past midnight, and again before dawn, for water already at his elbow and a fire already banked, only to watch whether she would arrive with a sour face. She arrived every time, without complaint. without the wounded look he was so clearly angling to provoke. She would come into the half-dark, attend to the invented grievance as if it were the most natural request, at the most reasonable hour, and go again, leaving him not one scrap of the reaction he had set the trap to catch. It enraged him, quietly, which is to say it began against his will to interest him. "You are remarkably difficult to offend," he observed one evening, watching her refold for the third time a blanket he had deliberately shoved to the floor. "My father would be glad to hear it." She smoothed the wool flat. "He spent the better part of 20 years trying, and never once managed." A pause. It was the first thing she had handed him that belonged to her and not to the work. He turned it over with the care of a man who found an unexpected object in a coat he thought he knew. "Your father. He lost the use of his left leg 3 years ago. A fall from a horse." Her hands went still on the blanket for the length of one breath. "He spent the first year in a fury at the world, and the second in a fury at himself. Having squandered the first, he said nothing. But the texture of his silence changed. Less the face of a locked door, more the narrow line of light beneath one that has been left, by accident, a finger's width open." She lifted the empty tray and made for the door. "Good night, Your Grace." What did he do? It came out before he had decided to ask it. In the second year, when the fury turned inward, she paused, hand on the latch, and considered the question with the seriousness she gave all things. "He told me," she said at last, low, "everything in time. The fear, the grief for the life he had been promised and would not get. The shame of being helpless in his own house, in front of the daughter who had once thought him the strongest man alive." She chose her words, like stepping stones across fast water. "And I have come to believe the telling of it was the beginning of his way back. 'Cause a thing spoken aloud loses some of its power to sit on your chest in the dark and convince you it will never lift." She opened the door. "I am a very good listener, Your Grace. Should you ever find the wanting to speak?" And she left him in the lamplight with an expression she could not read and did not try to, and she carried the tray down the cold stairs, thinking not of him at all, but of a jar of coins by a door 40 miles away, and a man waiting in a chair to learn whether his daughter had found work enough to keep them both through the winter. 3 nights later the bell rang at 2:30, and it did not ring like a test. She knew the difference by now. The test rings were sharp, impatient, performed. This one came short and broken and then stopped, as though the hand that pulled it had thought better of the whole idea the moment it began. She lay in the dark and weighed not going. He had spent 2 weeks inventing reasons to drag her from her bed for his own amusement. He had no claim on this hour. By any account she could make, she went anyway, because under all the calculation, she could not unlearn the particular sound of a man in real trouble, and that bell had not rung like vanity. It had rung like a hand breaking the surface of deep water. He had not lit the lamp. She brought her candle into a room that smelled of cold sweat and sleeplessness, and when the small light reached him, she saw the whole of it at once. He was not sitting up, in his managed grievance posture. He was hunched, half-turned, one hand pressed flat and white-knuckled to the dead weight of a thigh that could not feel the hand, his jaw locked so hard the bone of it showed. And in her eyes, for the first time since she had come into the house, there was no strategy at all, no game, only a man very far down, a hole startled past speech to find that anyone had come to the rim of it. The pain, she understood it then all at once. The way you understand a thing your own father has only ever shown sideways. The legs that would not stir still hurt. That was the private cruelty of his condition. The body had taken his standing and his striding and his riding, and then, as though that theft were too small, had kept the agony and returned none of the use. She did not gasp. She did not fuss. She set the candle where its light would fall short of stabbing him, and she crossed the room, and she crouched it at the level of his bowed head so that he could not pretend she was a shape in the doorway. "Tell me where, even. Steady. Not so I can mend it. I cannot. Only so you are not holding it alone in the dark, which is the one part of this I can take from you." He looked at her for a long, costly moment. The kind of look that takes more out of a proud man than any wound. It does not stop, rough, scarcely above the hiss of the candle. "That is the joke they forgot to tell me. They take everything else and they leave you that. I know, you cannot know. No, not your hurt. But I sat beside one very near to it for 3 years and I learned the worst of it is never the pain. It is the certainty that no one can reach you. And then the work you do to make certain no one tries. And then the one night the dark finally agrees with you." She held his eyes and did not let them go. "I will not agree with you, Your Grace. I want that understood between us from the start. Whatever you do, however hard you push, I am not going to agree." The breath went out of him in a long, uneven shudder, a surrender of something that was not the pain. He did not thank her. He would not for weeks yet. But he did not send her away. And when the worst of it ebbed at last, and his jaw eased, and the white hand fell slack from his thigh, he did not pretend, as he had every other night, that he had only rung to test her nerve. He let her stay until the candle guttered low. He let himself be seen. And in a house where for 2 years no soul had been permitted past the wall, that was the first true crack in it, and the cold morning light came creeping in through the gap, whether he forbade it or not. The fight that nearly broke her was not over food, and it was not over curtains. It was over a small brown bottle and the agony it was meant to lift. The estate physician had left a tincture for the nerve pain, and the Duke refused it with a ferocity that bordered on the theatrical. She offered it the 4th morning running. He pushed it aside, the 4th morning running, with the flat finality of a lid slammed on a pock. "It makes me stupid." There was iron in him even at dawn. "I will not be made stupid. It eases the pain, Your Grace. It eases everything. My thoughts slide off the page. I cannot follow a sentence to its end. I cannot reason. I cannot recall. I cannot." He stopped. The jaws set. "I will not be reduced to a warm body in a chair, drooling at the window. I would sooner have the pain. At least the pain is mine." She set the bottle down. And she did the one thing none of the broken nurses had ever dared. She asked him a question that had nothing to do with the bottle at all. "When your mind is clear and your own," she said, drawing the bedside chair close, "what is it you do with the hours?" It caught him sidewise. He looked at her as if she had laid a wire across the floor. "I used to, a breath, manage the estate, the correspondence, the tenants and their 1,000 quarrels, the accounts, which no man keeps honest, who does not keep them himself. And now, I manage nothing." "No," said, without cruelty, which made it land the harder, "because the pain is too great to hold a single thought steady, and you refuse the one thing that would quiet the pain. For fear it will steal the thoughts you can no longer use in any case. So you keep neither. You have surrendered the body, and you guard the mind by leaving it to rust in the dark. A man who manages nothing is not resting, Your Grace. He is rehearsing his own absence, and he is rather good at the part." The last word found something private and pressed on it. She watched it press. His eyes went to the window, then to his idle hands, then to nothing she couldn't name. "Half," she offered, before the silence could harden over again. "Half the dose the doctor wrote. Enough to dull the blade, not enough to cloud the glass. Try it 1 week. If your mind suffers, if your thoughts slide off the page even once, I give you my word I will never raise the subject again so long as I draw breath." Under Thuswif, a long quiet, with the decision moving slowly through it like a fish under ice. 1 week. The words dropped like stones. Down a well, reluctant the whole way down. 1 week. He held out his hand for the spoon. He did not look at her as he took it, but he took it. And somewhere far below the surface of the thing, in the locked room where he kept the quiet arrangement he had made with himself months before, a single bolt eased a quarter turn. He told himself it meant nothing, a week's experiment, a small concession to be rid of her nagging. He was lying, and some buried honest part of him knew it. A man rehearsing his absence does not bargain for a clearer mind. He bargains for it only when, against every intention, he has begun to suspect he might have some use for one after all. By the end of that week, he asked for writing paper. She brought it without a word of comment because comment would have built a monument out of a thing that needed to stay ordinary. A sheet, an inkwell, the good pen with the worn silver band, which the housekeeper produced from a locked drawer with the reverence of a relic. He took them to the great desk that had stood untouched and dustless under a maid's daily cloth for 2 years. And he bent over the paper, and he began, in a hand gone stiff and unfamiliar to him, the first letter he had written to his own steward since before the fall. She found him there one afternoon at the unlikely hour of 3. Bent over the page, lost in it. A small line dug between his brows, his lips moving faintly over a phrase he was weighing. Entirely unaware that anyone stood in the doorway, watching the lamplight pool across the back of his bowed neck and the working line of his shoulders. He looked, in that moment, like nothing so much as a man at his work. Not an invalid, not a problem to be turned and fed and dosed. A man doing the thing his hands had been shaped for. Something moved through her chest then, warm, slow. Wholly, inconveniently her own. She did not give it a name because to name it would have made it a thing she was obliged to do something about, and she had 3 years' practice at refusing to do anything about feelings that had no business existing in the first place. She stepped back into the corridor. She drew the door shut without a sound. She told herself, climbing back toward the linen room, that what she felt was only the plain, clean satisfaction of difficult work beginning to take. It was not only that. She knew quite well it was not only that. But the half-truth was warm, and the day was long, and there were trays to see too. And she let the lie keep her company, because the alternative was to stand still and look directly at the thing. And she was not ready. And a woman who counts coins by a door does not get to indulge feelings that cannot be afforded. The letter went out by the evening post. 3 days later, a reply came from the steward, a careful, astonished, joyful thing, and the Duke read it twice, and set it down and stared at the wall for a while, with an expression she had not seen on him before. It took her a moment to place it, because she had not seen it on him at all. It was the face of a man remembering that he is good at something. It took 3 more weeks of relentless, unbroken stubbornness, most of it his, to get him out of the room entirely. She had learned by then that asking permission only manufactured refusals, the way flint makes sparks whether you want them or not. So she stopped asking. One sharp, bright afternoon, she simply appeared in his doorway, with his outdoor coat folded over her arm, and the tone of a woman announcing a long-standing engagement that admitted no debate. The South Terrace. 10 minutes, he grumbled. The light was too strong. The gravel would foul the wheels. He saw no earthly reason to abandon a perfectly adequate room for the wind and the glare. She laid the coat across the arm of his chair and stood beside it, and waited with the look of a woman who had already heard every verse of a tired old song and found none of them worth her feet. He got into the chair. She wheeled him out through the long glazed doors and onto the wide gray terrace, and then, as his complaints about the brightness thinned for want of fresh grievance, she simply kept going. Down the winding gravel paths. Past the late-hate hydrangeas gone brown and heavy at the edges. Past the stone figures the ivy had half swallowed and made strange. Toward the great flat sheet of the lake that lay at the foot of the grounds, throwing the afternoon back up at the sky in long shifting bands of light. And she talked the whole way, not about him, not his health, his legs, his appetite, his recovery, any of the airless, laden subject that had filled their hours. She talked about the head gardener, who appeared to hold a radical philosophy of leaving every growing thing entirely to its own devices, a principled refusal to interfere that had over 2 years produced a kind of magnificent anarchy. She talked about the parish vicar, whose hat was of dimensions so aggressively unfashionable that it could only be a matter of deep personal conviction. She described, against her own dignity, her collision on her very first morning with a stone bird bath. She had somehow failed to see, despite its being neither small nor quietly colored. He said nothing. But after the third absurdity, his grip on the armrests had eased. She marked it without turning her head. They reached the water. The willows trailed their long green fingers in it. She stopped the chair where the gravel surrendered to cropped grass, and she surveyed the scene at his side as though delivering a verdict. Your head gardener, she mused, is either a genius of the untamed, or he has slept soundly at his post for the better part of a year. That rose there, the one devouring the trellis hole, it has gone entirely feral. I believe it means to have the wall by autumn, and the gate after. He tried to hold the scowl. She could see the labor of it in the jaw, in the set of the shoulders. He failed. A sound broke out of him, low, rusted from long disuse, scraping up out of some shut chamber in his chest. A laugh, brief, startled, escaping before he could shut the door on it. He clamped his mouth the instant it came, looking near to alarmed at himself, like a man who has heard a noise in an empty house, and slowly understood that he was the one who made it. She turned. She looked down at him, and the light fell across his face at an angle that stripped 2 years clean off it, took the bitterness and the exhaustion and the salt away, and left a man caught wide open, not young, unguarded, as though a window had been thrown up in a house that had forgotten it owned a single one. He looked up and found her already watching him. The quiet that fell between them then was a different country from every quiet that had come before. Not his fortress, not her patience. Only two people standing in the same hard, bright afternoon, seeing each other plainly, with nothing whatever in the way. She felt it settle low and warm, under her ribs, the awareness she had no right to. She reached out of long habit for the cool professional distance she kept always within arm's length, and found for the first time in her working life that it was simply not there to take hold of. So she smiled instead, real, unguarded, entirely her own. He took it the way a frozen man takes the first warm hour of spring, half afraid it will be withdrawn. He studied the shape of it and the light behind her eyes, and then the rigid line of his shoulders gave way, and he smiled back, a real one, slow, devastating in its plainness, aimed at nothing in the whole turning world but her. No word passed. The willows stirred, the water broke the light and knitted again, and something turned over between them that could not be turned back, and they both felt it turn, and neither dared name it. And she made herself look again at the feral rose and resume talking about it in a voice that came out. She noticed with private dismay, not nearly as steady as she had sent it. She should have known. Hope in a man who has signed himself over to despair does not arrive as relief. It arrives as a threat. It is the most frightening thing in the world to a man who has made his peace with the dark, because it asks him to unmake that peace and stand in the open and risk wanting something he might still lose. He did not sleep that night. She learned how he had spent it the next morning. She came in at 7 and drew the curtains as always, and turned with a greeting half-formed on her lips and met a stranger. The lake was gone from him as though it had never been. His face had closed like a fist, and when he spoke it was in the old voice, the burnt one, only colder now, because cold by design cuts deeper than cold by habit. You will leave the curtains tomorrow, and you will remember precisely what you are. She went still. Your Grace, you are a paid attendant. You are not my companion. You are not my friend, and you are certainly not whatever sentimental creature you imagined yourself on that path yesterday, smiling up at me as though we were two equals out walking for the air. Each word set down with surgical care, exactly where it would do the most harm. You have forgotten yourself, Miss Fairweather. You are paid to be in this room, not in my life. The arrangement does not reach past that door, and the sooner you stop pretending otherwise, the better for us both. It was a lie. She knew it for a lie the moment it left him. Built plank by plank, for the single purpose of driving her off before she could cost him anything. Knowing did not stop it from finding the soft place beneath her ribs and pressing down with its whole weight. I see. 3 years of bedside discipline holding her voice level while everything behind it buckled. Then I will see to the tray. She saw to the tray. She did the day's work. She did all of it with her chin steady, and her hands betraying her only in the moments no one watched. And that night, alone in her narrow room, she took out paper of her own and began to write the letter that gave her notice. Not because she was weak, because she was good at her work, and a good attendant knows the hour when her presence has begun to cost but her patient more than it gives, and a wise woman does not stay where she has been told twice. That intrusion, she wrote half a page. She told herself is the right and professional thing. She believed it for the better part of an hour, and then she thought of the steward's joyful letter twice over, and the man remembering he was good at something, and the laugh dragged up out of a shut room. And she set the pen down and sat very still, and understood that she did not want to go, and that, wanting not to go was exactly the trouble, and that the man downstairs had not lied to wound her, but to send her safely away from the wreck he believed himself to be. She did not finish the letter. She did not tear it up either. She left it half-written on the table, a thing not yet decided. And she put out the candle and lay in the dark, and waited for a morning. She no longer knew how to meet. The bell rang at 1 in the morning. She thought, for one long bitter moment of not going. He had unmade her with his own mouth not 18 hours past. He had surrendered by his own cold argument every claim on her midnights. She went anyway, because she could not unlearn the sound of a man in trouble, and that bell had not rung like a test, and it had not rung like vanity. It had rung like a hand reaching up out of water that had finally closed over the head. He was worse than the first night she had sat with him. Far worse, and this was not the body's pain alone. He had not lit the lamp. He sat in the dark with his head in his hands, and when the candle found his face, she saw that the Duke of Wycliffe had been weeping, and had not intended for any living soul to know it. I should not have rung. Ragged. Stripped. Forgive me. Go back to your bed. No. She set the candle down. She did not take the bedside chair this time. She crossed straight to him and crouched at the level of his bowed head, and waited until he could no longer pretend she was not there. Say it, she told him. Quiet, unyielding, whatever it is. You spent yesterday building a wall to keep me on the far side, and tonight you rang the bell to call me back through the gap in it. So say the thing you built the wall to hide. I am very tired, your grace, of guessing at proud men who would sooner break in private than be plain in company. The breath went out of him in a long, jerking shudder. And then it came, all of it, in the broken way a thing comes, when it has been held under far too long. I pushed you away because you have made me want to live. His hands fell open in his lap. He lifted his ruined face to her, and wanting it is the single most dangerous thing a dying man can do. You understand me. Merely stubborn. Listen to me. I gave it all away the winter I fell. The estate, the lands, the name, the whole of it, settled on my cousin and signed before the snow melted, because a responsible man names his heir when his body turns traitor. And I was nothing if not responsible, a breath. But that was sense. The other thing was not. A few months ago, when the last hopeful young doctor packed his bag and went, I made a quieter arrangement, not on any paper. With myself. I decided how I would go and at what pace, and that no one would notice the going until it was finished and too late to argue. The curtains, the refused trays, the tonic poured into the fire. None of it was temper, whatever it looked like from the hall. It was a man tidying his own departure, because it was the last estate left that I could still command. The room held very still, and then a woman I had never seen stood at my back and called me a coward, and would not weep, and would not flinch, and opened my curtains every morning, as though my forbidding it were a child's game played at a game I had already lost. And now I have laughed at a rose by my own lake, and I cannot get the wanting back into its box, and that terrifies me past anything that Cher ever did. Because the chair only took my legs. The wanting can take my peace. The wanting means I have something left to lose again, and I had worked so hard, so carefully, to have nothing. She let the silence hold him a moment. Then she spoke, low and certain. Then, you are not dying, Your Grace. You are only frightened of living, which is a wholly different illness, and one I have nursed before, and one that need not be fatal if a man will let it be argued with. You signed those papers and made that arrangement when you believed there was nothing left worth staying for. You are permitted to have been wrong. Men of sense revise their accounts the moment the figures change, and the figures, I would say, have changed. He stared at her, and something in him that had been clenched 2 full years let go by a single notch. I am sorry, he said. The words came hard, as if he had to break ground to reach them. For yesterday. For the cruelty of it, which was deliberate and aimed and beneath me. I have done a great many regrettable things from this chair. That is the first I am ashamed of. She did not make it easy, and she did not make it hard. Good, she said. Then we will speak no more of resignations, either of us. And she let him understand that she knew about the half-written letter upstairs, and that it was already, in her own mind, ash. He did not let go of the fear that night. A thing rooted so deep does not lift in a single hour. But he let her see the whole of it, and being seen whole, it weighed a little less than it had when he carried it alone. And somewhere in the dark, between the candle and the gray, a man who had spent 2 years rehearsing his absence began, without once saying so aloud, to consider the reckless, indecent possibility of a future. What neither of them knew, sitting in that small circle of failing light, was that the future they had just cracked open a door upon already had an enemy. And that the enemy was at that very hour 40 miles south in a London townhouse, reading by the same late candlelight a letter that informed him his dying cousin had begun most inconveniently to recover. A man planning to die signs everything away and never looks at the papers again. A man planning to live picks them back up. And 3 mornings after the worst night of his recovery, the Duke of Wycliffe picked them back up. He did it quietly, the way a man eases into cold water rather than plunging. He had Beatrice carry up the great bound account books from the steward's room, 2 years of them, leather gone stiff and pale at the spines from disuse. And he spread them across the desk and bent to the long, dull, necessary work of learning what had become of his house, while he had sat with his face turned to the wall. She watched the change come over him as he read, and it was a thing to see. The vagueness burned off him like morning fog off the lake. The old Duke surfaced. The one on the count he had feared, the one who could find a single false figure standing among 100 true ones, the way a shepherd finds the one ewe that is not his. He went very quiet, then very still, and then a cold she had not seen in him before, colder by far than any of his cruelties, came down over his features like frost forming on glass while you watch. Beatrice. He had never used her given name before. He used it now without appearing to notice he had. Come here. Read this with me, she came. She knew nothing of accounts, but she knew faces, and his told her the whole of it before her eyes reached the page. This authorization, a long finger pinned a line, for the sale of the lower meadow timber, the season after my fall. I never gave it, this one. A draft against the London bank, drawn on the estate's name. I signed. And yet he turned a leaf, turned another. His voice did not climb, it sank, which was worse. Here is my signature. And here again, on a dozen instruments I have no memory of making, because I made none of them. Someone has been writing my name in a very fair imitation of my own hand for 2 years. While I sat above stairs, being gently encouraged toward the grave, someone has been emptying, drawer by patient drawer, the house I was being so kindly invited to leave. The understanding settled on her cold and complete, the way the chill of deep water finds you only after you are already under. Your cousin, she said. Because there was a single name written into those documents, as the man who took the benefit of each one. The same name, she remembered with a sick lurch, that he had told her 2 nights past he had signed the entire inheritance over to. The heir was robbing the estate he already stood to inherit. He could not even wait to be given it, my cousin. The faintest, most dangerous curve touched the Duke's mouth. Percival, who has visited so faithfully these 2 years, whose tenderness for me has swelled in exact proportion to my decline, and who would weep, I am sure, most beautifully at my funeral. He stood to have all of it the moment I obliged him by dying, and it seems he could not bear to wait even for that small courtesy. He has been quietly collecting his inheritance in advance. In case I proved tiresome and lingered, she watched a man come the rest of the way awake in front of her. Whatever the frozen ground had taken 2 winters ago, it had not laid a finger on this. The mind was all there, every edge of it, sharp as a blade left too long forgotten and drawn the duller for the neglect. "What will you do?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. Yet, a man who shows his hand at the table loses it. My cousin believes me a fading creature who cannot read his own accounts, let alone defend them. That belief is, at this moment, the only weapon I possess, and I will not throw it away, for the brief childish pleasure of an accusation he could deny in a breath. He drew a fresh sheet toward him and uncapped the ink. "I will write to my solicitor, privately. The letter will go out under your hand and not the household's, posted in the village, seen by no one here. He will go through every transaction of these 2 years, gather what is provable, secure the bank's own records, and he will say nothing to any living soul until I send for him. Until that day, I will be exactly the broken, harmless thing my cousin requires me to be. I have had a great deal of practice at looking finished. It will not strain me to perform it a little longer." He glanced up at her then, and beneath the cold there was a grim flicker of the man who had laughed at a feral rose. "It seems," he said, "that I have discovered a reason to want my house back after all. You will forgive me if I have decided, rather suddenly, to keep it." And myself with it he wrote the letter that night. In the clear, strong hand, his cousin had spent 2 years counterfeiting. She carried it down to the village herself the next morning, told not a soul, and posted it with her own coin so that no ledger of the house would ever record it. And as she walked back up the long avenue, under the bare October trees, she felt the shape of a coming storm settle over Wycliffe Hall. The particular heaviness of the air before weather breaks, and she did not yet know its name. But she would. Within the week she would. The storm had a name, and it traveled fast. Within 3 days of the steward's joyful gossip spreading through the county that the Duke had been seen out of doors, upright in spirit if not in body, looking disturbingly well. The news had run the 40 miles to London and arrived in the elegant townhouse of Mr. Percival Ashcombe. Percival had spent 2 comfortable years as the presumed heir. He had borrowed against a title that was all but in his hand. He had conducted himself with the easy confidence of a man whose fortune was merely delayed by a cousin's bad manners in failing to die on schedule. The report that the Duke had left the house grounds, sat tall, breathed the air, and asked after his own accounts, struck Percival with a cold he recognized at once and named privately for what it was: the feeling of an inheritance beginning to recede. A recovering Duke could change a will. A recovering Duke could live another 20 years and outlast every creditor Percival had. A recovering Duke was, in short, a catastrophe wearing the mask of a miracle. He packed his trunks that same afternoon, and he descended on Wycliffe Hall with the radiant grief of a man bringing the happiest news of his life. He embraced his aunt. He declared himself overcome, undone, scarcely able to believe it. He spoke of his beloved cousin's recovery, in tones so warm they nearly fogged the windows, and he watched everything, every face and every door, with the patient cataloging eyes of a man who already knew the precise shape of the problem he had ridden through the night to solve. It took him less than a day to find it. He found it from the upper gallery. One evening, looking down into the garden where Beatrice was wheeling the Duke along the gravel in the last of the light, he watched his cousin say some low thing and watched the woman's head tip back with a bright, unguarded laugh, the laugh of someone entirely at ease. And he watched Theodore's face as it turned up toward her. It was not the face of a sick man tolerating a useful servant. It was the focused, illuminated, astonished attention of a man who has found a thing he had stopped believing existed and cannot quite get over the finding of it. Percival's smile thinned to a line and then to nothing at all. The problem had a single solution. The solution had a single name. Remove the woman, and the Duke's strange new appetite for living would have nothing to feed on. Grief would do the rest. Grief, Percival reflected, was such a reliable poison and left so few marks. He found his moment the next evening, when the Duke had worn himself thin over the correspondence, and Beatrice had slipped down to the library on the honest errand of fetching a book to read aloud. She was reaching for a volume on a high shelf when the doors clicked shut behind her. She turned. He was leaning against them, arms folded, wearing the look of a man who has rehearsed his lines in the carriage and is pleased with them. And Miss Fairweather. He came off the door and moved into the room with the circling ease of a man accustomed to owning every space he enters. The whole household speaks of nothing but you. You have made the most remarkable impression on us all. I do my work, sir. Come. You are a clever girl, and clever girls see clearly. You must know how it looks. A common attendant, hired by the quarter, become overnight the sole and indispensable companion of a wealthy, lonely man with no one left to spend his fortune on. He stopped a few feet off and looked her over with an appraisal that had nothing warm anywhere in it. I do not judge it. I am a practical man. And practicality is its own kind of mercy. He reached into his coat and drew out a heavy velvet purse, and he set it down on the nearest reading table with a deliberate, weighted clink that was meant to be heard. There is enough there to settle you very comfortably. A new place in any household you choose, with a character written in my own hand. Provision for that invalid father I have heard so much about, the one in the cottage 40 miles north. His voice dropped, and the warmth drained clean out of it, like water from a cracked basin. Take it. Be gone before morning. Tell him the burden grew too great for you. For a month, and then he will recover, and you will have spared him the indignity of making a public spectacle of himself over a girl so far beneath his station that the county would want to laugh for a generation. Beatrice looked at the purse a long moment. Then she looked at the man, and if I refuse? The pleasantness fell off his face like a dropped mask. Then I will see you put out of this house without a character. A word in the right ear is the easiest thing in the world. Theft, impropriety, any small ugly suggestion you cannot disprove, because how does a servant disprove a gentleman's regretful whisper? You will leave here unemployable, your name in ruins from here to the coast, and your father with neither care, nor coin, nor a daughter to bring them. I am being generous, Miss Fairweather. I am offering you the soft road. A wise woman takes the soft road when it is offered, because the next offer is so rarely kind. She stepped forward. She picked up the book she had come for, and she stepped around him with the same unhurried calm she had once used to step around his cousin's deliberate silence on her very first lost morning in the house. You have mistaken me for someone who frightens, sir. She paused at the door, her hand on the latch, and her voice did not shake. I answer to the Duke. I answer to her Grace. I do not answer to a man who only recalls he has a family the moment he smells the inheritance slipping out of his fingers. Good evening. She walked out and left him alone with his purse in the lamplight. But she felt no triumph. Walking back along the cold corridor, with the book held hard against her chest and her heart going uneven, she understood with perfect clarity that the threat was no bluff. Men like Percival Ashcombe do not abandon a plan. Because a woman declines to be bought, they only change the weapon, and whatever came next would come fast, and would be built with care, and would be designed to leave her no door at all to walk out of. She smoothed her face before she reached the study. She set the book on the desk. She took her chair, calm as still water. and said not one word of it, because she would not frighten him, and she would not hand his cousin the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. She only sat and watched the man she had no business loving bend over the letters that were quietly arming him for a war he did not yet know had already been declared against. Peace on the board he could least afford to lose. It came 3 days later. The way bad weather comes after you have watched the sky go wrong for hours and still flinch when the first crack of it splits the air. She knew before the footman finished speaking. She knew from the way he would not lift his eyes to hers. The drawing room. Her Grace requests you at once. The corridor she walked down had gone the particular silence. A great house only goes when something real is being arranged inside it. A hush of held breath and closed doors, and servants find sudden urgent business in other rooms. She did not hurry. Hurrying tells a trap that it has worked. She opened the drawing-room doors and understood the whole design in a single sweep of the eye. Lady Augusta stood by the cold hearth, white to the lips, a handkerchief twisted in both old hands until the knuckles shone, and across from her, immaculate grave, wearing the borrowed sorrow of a man performing a duty that pains him deeply, stood Percival, and between them, laid out upon the polished table with theatrical care, so the light could catch it, lay a river of diamonds. The Dowager Duchess's necklace. "Come in, Miss Fairweather." Percival's voice carried the heavy gentleness of a man enjoying himself enormously and hiding it poorly. She stepped in. She gave the old woman a small, steady bow and addressed her, and her alone. "Your Grace, you sent for me." Lady Augusta opened her mouth. Nothing came out of it. "A maid was sent up to set your room to rights this morning." Percival took the answer his aunt could not find. "She discovered this beneath a loosened floorboard under your bed. Poorly hidden, I am grieved to say. As though done in haste by someone who did not expect to be searched so soon. I have never set eyes on that necklace before this moment." Her voice held. Her folded hands did not. "I did not take it." "Of course you say so," he sighed. The practiced sigh of a man for whom sympathy was only another tool in a well-stocked box, and turned to his aunt with the air of a prophet vindicated by sorrow. "I warned you. Did I not warn you? Bring a desperate girl into a house heavy with treasure she has never in her life stood near, surround her with it, and call the surrounding charity. It is no great moral failing, aunt. It is only what need does to people the world has given nothing. I am not a thief." It came sharper than she meant, and she drew it back at once, because sharpness was precisely what he wanted. Sharpness read as guilt to a frightened ear. She turned full to the old woman. "Your Grace, you know me. You know my work, and you know my character. And you know I have never once asked you for a thing, but the wage I was promised. Look at me and tell me you believe this of me." And there it was, the thing she had dreaded. The old woman's eyes went from her face to the diamonds, to Percival's grave certainty, to the diamonds again, anguished, helpless, a mother who had already lost 2 years of her son to the dark and could not bear now to be wrong in either direction, wanting to believe the girl. Terrified of the evidence laid so neatly upon her own table. "I have sent for the magistrate," Percival said, and let the borrowed sorrow drop from his face like a cloak no longer needed. "He will be here within the hour." The cold of it went down through her and settled in her stomach with the dead weight of a stone, and she could not set down. A working woman accused of theft in a house of this rank. A titled gentleman swearing the testimony against her. It would not matter that she was innocent. In a county hearing, innocence was never the question put. The question was always whose word the room had been built to believe, and the room had never once, in all of history, been built to believe hers. She would be arrested, tried, made a lesson of, exactly as he had promised her over a velvet purse. And she had no proof, no power, no standing. Only her word. And her word in that room was a single candle held up against the broad noon sun. Percival crossed to her and bent close, and his voice fell to a thread, meant for her ears alone. "You should have taken the purse, little bird," he murmured almost tenderly. "Now you Leave in irons. She gave him no flinch. She gave him nothing at all. She kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and waited for the hour to bring the man who would put her in a cart. And she thought, with a strange, clear grief that surprised her, not of herself, but of a man above stairs, bent over his letters, who did not yet know the war he was so carefully arming for had just been won in a single, quiet stroke, against the one piece on the board he could not replace. And then a sound came from the corridor, not the soft roll of wheels on carpet. She knew that sound the way she knew her own breathing, and this was not it. This was a footstep, heavy, deliberate, landing flat and whole on the marble of the hall. Then the bright hard strike of something against the stone, a cane. Then a second footstep, dragging, fighting for its place, and finding it. She turned toward the doors, and the breath stopped dead in her chest. A shadow fell across the threshold, and then a man came through it. He had one hand locked white-knuckled to the frame of the door. The other gripped a silver-tipped cane as though it were the last solid thing in a world tipping over. He was breathing in great rough pulls. His face was set, with the savage concentration of a man who has demanded something monstrous of his own body, and refuses, by sheer force of will, to let the body know what it has cost. His legs trembled beneath him. His balance was as a thing borrowed by the second, not owned. But he was up, he was on his own 2 feet. The Duke of Wycliffe stood in the doorway of his own drawing-room, upright for the first time in 2 years. Lady Augusta made a sound that came from no practiced part of her. The composure she had held through 2 years of watching her son rot in the dark simply broke, all at once, and pressed the ruined handkerchief to her mouth and could not speak. Percival stumbled back a full step, and the blood went out of his face so fast. It left him a curious, satisfying gray, the color of a man watching his future rearrange itself against his real cousin. It cracked coming out. You are standing." Theodore did not look at him. He took one slow, grinding step into the room. Then another. The cane struck the marble, and his boots scraped and dragged and held, and the silence was so total that every inch of his crossing rang out enormous, and not one soul in that room remembered how to breathe. He stopped in front of Beatrice, and then, with the last of whatever he was burning to stay upright, he turned himself and set his body square between her and his cousin, between her and the door the magistrate would come through. She could see the fine, violent tremor in the arm that held the cane, the ferocity with which he was overriding a frame that wanted nothing in the world but to fold beneath him. He spoke over his shoulder, and his voice held none of the weakness of his legs in it. It was level and absolute, and it carried to every corner of the room. "You will send a rider after the magistrate and turn him back before he reaches this house. Then you will pack your trunks, and you will be off my land before the sun touches the trees. I am reporting a crime." Percival scrambled for the high ground he had stood on so comfortably a minute before. "The woman is a thief. You cannot simply walk in here and overrule the law on a whim of sentiment. You cannot. You planted it." Theodore did not raise his voice. He lowered it, which was infinitely worse, under her bed. "Because she would not be bought, and a woman who will not be bought is the only kind you have ever truly feared. I know about the purse, Percival. I know about the threat, the ruined name, the father left without care. She told me none of it. She is far too proud to have asked anyone for rescue. But this is my house, and I have lately gone to the trouble of learning to keep my eyes open in it. She is a servant. Desperation was making him reckless now, the mask coming away in pieces. She is common. She has no place in your life, beyond the carrying of trays, and you would let a cripple's loneliness make a public fool of the whole name. I gave 2 years to this family. 2 years. I sat at your bedside while you turned your face to the wall and waited to die. I held this estate together with my own hands, and you would hand the whole of it to the first plain woman who learned how to manage you. And there, for one ugly, silly, honest instant, the thing beneath the greed showed its face. Because Percival believed it. He believed. with the whole of his small, starved heart, that a man who had thrown his life away had forfeited the right to it, and that who had wanted that life so badly and waited for it so long deserved it more than a duke who had not even valued it enough to fight for it. You held nothing together, Theodore said. You held your hand out for 2 years. And while I was being so gently steered toward the grave, you signed my name to a dozen instruments I never made and drew on my accounts and bled this estate into your own debts. In a hand so near to mine, you must have practiced it by candlelight while you waited for me to oblige you. And stop breathing. The room went very still. Theodore reached into his coat with the hand not clamped to the cane and drew out a folded sheaf of papers and let them fall open on the diamond-strewn table beside the necklace. Copied authorizations, bank drafts, a letter under the solicitor's own seal, laying the whole of it out in a column that did not lie and could not be talked away. My solicitor has spent these past weeks doing the reading too broken to do for myself, Theodore said. Every forged signature, every drained account, every false lease. It is here, attested and witnessed and sworn with the bank's own records to second it. You did not come to celebrate my recovery, Percival. You came to finish a theft you began the winter I fell, and you forged my name while I was busy like a fool, forgiving you for wanting me dead. Percival's eyes went to the papers, to his aunt, to the woman he had come so carefully to break, and the gray in his face deepened past the fear of mere inconvenience into the colder, the fear of ruin. You would not dare, he managed. The name. You would never drag the family through a public court. Try me. Theodore's mouth curved, and there was nothing kind in it. You have spent 2 years believing me a finished man who could neither stand nor count nor lift his own hand to defend himself. I am, it turns out, considerably less finished than you required me to be. Go, tonight. And if I ever again hear your name spoken in any county in connection with hers, in any matter, you will discover precisely how much of the old Duke is still living in this house. The magistrate you summoned will hear about you instead, and I will hand him these papers myself. Percival looked once more around the room, at every face that had turned away from him, and found no door left to stand in and no ground left to claim. He went, fast, graceless, stripped of every ounce of the performance he had carried through the front doors. His steps echoed down the long hall, and then the great outer doors thudded shut behind him, and the man who had come to bury a recovering duke was simply, finally, gone. Lady Augusta crossed to her son. She did not speak. There were no words she trusted for the thing breaking open in her after 2 years of grief. She took his face in both her old hands, the way she must have done when he was a small boy, and pressed her forehead to his shoulder for one long moment. Then she gathered herself with the iron of her generation and gestured the footman out ahead of her and drew the doors gently shut behind them both. She understood, as old women do, that some moments are not built to hold a witness. And then there were two. The will that had carried him across that marble floor began. The instant it was no longer needed, to drain out of him like water from a cracked jug, he swayed. The cane skated on the stone. She was already moving. She crossed the room in 3 strides and got her shoulder beneath his arm and her hands hard around him, and took his whole weight before his knees could finish their long-delayed argument with the ground. He let her. For one moment, only one, the proud man leaned into her entirely, his forehead coming down to rest against her temple. A single enormous shuddering breath leaving him. 2 full years of fighting everything and everyone, and his own ruined body released all at once into the curve of her neck. "You magnificent fool," she breathed, and her voice was nothing whatever like steady. "You could have killed yourself. You should have sent for the footman. You should have called for help from the corridor instead of—" "I was not," he managed against her hair, "going to send a footman to stand between you and the law. You could have called out from the hall, 'Theodore,' something in the way she said. Only his name, plain, with nothing of the attendant left in the saying of it, and nothing of the Duke left in his hearing. It stopped her where she stood. He straightened by slow degrees. She steered him to the table's edge where he could brace himself, and he turned to face her, close, far closer than the moment required, and she found that she did not step back from it. "You named me your fiancé," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. In front of him. "You said it to his face, I did, to stop the arrest. I understand. It was the only weapon at hand. You needn't. Is that what you think?" His eyes, worn to the bone with exhaustion, were nonetheless wide awake and fixed on her, with the sharp, specific attention he gave to the things that mattered. "Who taught you, Beatrice, to go reaching for the convenient explanation when a man is standing in front of you on legs he has not used in 2 years? Telling you a true thing?" She had no answer to that. Her heart was striking her ribs in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the crisis just past and everything to do with the nearness of him. "I have been trying," he said, "to find the right hour for this the better part of a month, and I have concluded there is no right hour, and that I am therefore going to say it now. Standing in a room full of evidence, with my mother weeping in the corridor and my legs about to give beneath me, which is, I suspect, very like me." He drew a breath. "You did not nurse me back to health. Any steady woman with a strong stomach might have done that much. You argued me back into wanting it. You walked into my study and refused to lower your voice for me. And you opened my curtains as though my grief were no excuse for poor manners, and you would not agree with me about the dark. And somewhere in all that arguing, I stopped planning how to leave and started, God help me, planning how to stay. I am in love with you. I have been since the morning you called me a coward to the back of an empty chair. I do not intend to recover from it. And I find I do not wish to. You are a duke," she said, barely above a whisper. "I am paid by the quarter. I empty your trays. You are the woman who told me a man who manages nothing is rehearsing his own absence. You are the woman who knelt on the floor of my room at 1 in the morning and would not let me lie to her. My mother has, I suspect, already begun planning a wedding she has not yet been invited to plan. My entire household would walk into that lake for you. And the only person in this whole county who appears to doubt your fitness for the position is you." His hand came up and found hers. "If you tell me to sit back down in that chair and forget every word of this, I will. I will never make you anything you do not wish to be. But I meant all of it, every word I threw at Percival, and I would have you hear it as the plain truth, and not a trick played to save your neck." She looked at their hands, at his face, at the man he was now. Not the brittle ruin she had found, behind drawn curtains on a Monday morning, but the one who had stood up out of 2 years of dark, to put his own failing body between her and the law. The man she had, against every rule she had ever set herself, fallen entirely and helplessly in love with. "You are going to be insufferable about this," she said. "If I say yes, I am already insufferable about most things." His smile broke across his whole face then, wide and real, and worth every one of the 2 years it had cost to find it again. "Undoubtedly," he agreed. She closed the distance between them. The kiss was not graceful. She was trembling, and he was not yet steady, and the silver-tipped cane slid from his grip and clattered to the marble somewhere in the first moment of it, and neither of them so much as marked it go. It was warm and certain and unhurried, the way two people come together when they have spent long weeks refusing to, and have at last, mercifully given up the effort. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his chest and felt, beneath her hands, the slow return of his breathing to something a body could go on living with. "Insufferable," she murmured into the wool of his coat. Without question, he agreed, and his arms came around her and held. And for the first time in 2 years, the man held something, instead of letting it go. "Now, before we leave them in that bright, ruined room, sit with this a moment, because it is the part that matters, and it is the part the world is worst at remembering. There is a particular cruelty we keep for people whose bodies have begun to fail them. We do not mean it as cruelty. That is exactly what makes it so hard to see for what it is. We lower our voices around them. We finish their sentences before they can. We talk over their heads in the same room, as though the chair or the illness or the years had carried off the person along with the use of the legs. We decide quietly, with great tenderness on our faces, that the best of them has already happened, and the rest is only waiting. And then we are surprised, every single time, when they begin to believe us, when they go quiet, when they stop reaching, when they turn their faces to the wall and start, in 100 small ways, to agree. Theodore Ashcombe very nearly died of that, not of the fall. The fall took his legs and his pride, and a man can survive the loss of both. What almost finished him was the soft, relentless, loving agreement of everyone around him that a man who cannot stand is a problem to be managed gently toward the door. He arranged his own departure in a clear, strong hand, because the whole world had, in effect, already drawn up the papers, and he was merely being polite enough to countersign them. What changed it was not a medicine, and it was not a miracle. It was one person who refused to use the gentle voice, who treated his rudeness as rudeness and his mind as a mind still worth arguing with, and his future as a thing still unwritten and still his to write. She did not pity him. Pity, he would tell you now, is the most comfortable coffin ever built, lined and cushioned and easy to lie down in. She respected him enough to fight with him instead. And being fought with, being held to a standard, being treated as a man and not a tragedy, is what called him back across a line he had very nearly finished crossing. He opened the curtains himself after that, every morning. It was the first thing he did, before the tray, before the letters, before anything. He crossed the room on his own hard one, and unsteady legs, and threw them wide, and let the morning pour in. Not because he had come to love the light especially, because for 2 years it had been the one thing he forbade, and a man reclaims his life one forbidden thing at a time, one drawn curtain at a time, until the house that had been a tomb is only a house again, and full of mourning. So, here is the truth underneath the whole of it. A man is not finished when his body fails him. He is finished the day he agrees with the people who buried him early. And the difference between those two things, between a hard chapter and a closed book, is nothing grander than one stubborn soul who looks at him and refuses, plainly and daily, to see a ruin where a man is still standing. It makes you wonder how many we have quietly written off, not because they had nothing left to give, but because it was simply easier to believe they didn't. How many fathers in chairs by drawn windows? How many old friends gone silent? How many proud, difficult, worn-down men are waiting right now, tonight, for one person to argue with them instead of arranging their affairs around their absence? So let me ask you, before you go, have you ever been counted out by people who never once bothered to learn your story and lived to prove every last one of them wrong? Or have you been the stubborn one, the one who refused to give up on someone the rest of the world had already buried? Tell me about it in the comments. I read them, all of them, because somewhere out there tonight is a man sitting in the dark, certain his best days are behind him, certain the curtains are meant to stay shut, and he needs to hear from someone who has been where he is that the curtains can still be opened. Be the one who opens them.